That's called When Our Destinies Meet, which is what I would call a black box LARP. Or I think what it says on the thing, the game itself, is a toolbox for black box tape LARPing or something like that. So it's not actually a game. It's a system to make games, which is why we want to do it with you, so you can see how we construct a game. This is not by far the only way of constructing games. It is one way of approaching this kind of game design. It's definitely not the only thing that you focus on when you design things. This is a particular aesthetic we're looking at. So we will have a lot of different things involved in this compared to other games. This, my dear friend over here, would call it a free-form game. Some Jeeps would probably accept it as a Jeep form game, but I call it LARP, a black box LARP or chamber LARP. And when I say black box, we're talking about a theater studio black box. So it's that you play it in an empty space rather than you play it out in a 360 degree illusion set. And that's why we have I call it black box because I come from theater and LARPing. And there's a bunch of us who comes from LARPing calling freeform black box LARPing. And if you go to Norway, they call it chamber LARPing. And if you do, this is like, it's terminology is just to confuse you. This is what we're planning to do today. What we have left to do. A little bit of this is more like 45, I guess, and then 15, but we'll do it a little bit faster. The workshop, we'll have a little break in the middle, so don't worry about the 3-hour block. And we'll have lunch. Maybe that goes a little bit shorter because we just, because it was a bit longer than we imagined. And then we'll play the LARP. It's about an hour and a half. It can be played up to between 1 and 2 hours. 1 is really short, but an hour and a half to 2.5 hours if you want to play it ever again. But we'll do it for an hour and a half, so we have half an hour debrief too. But first, I'm going to run through a design tool that we use to make some choices. You can use this as an analysis tool, but it's not created as an analysis tool. But it's used not really as a pedagogical tool either to communicate what a game is, because it's too hard to really understand. But it's a way of thinking when you design a game. What elements do I want to do in what way? We call it the mixing desk of LARP. A mixing desk, like a sound mixing desk, there is different levers that you will shift to get different sounds have different volumes. So we use that very similarly in this way to look at different. So it looks like this. We have here, I'm going to zoom in on them later so you don't have to worry about not being able to read them, but I'll read them to you so you see what the mixing desk is. It's the communication style. Is it verbal or physical communication? Is it pressure on the player? Is that hardcore or is it more pretense? So it's the player pressure. Is it bleed in? Is it differentiated from yourself or is it close to home? The bleed in the game. Player motivation, is it competitive or cooperative? Why are you like motivated to interact with the medium, so to speak, the game? The openness, is it transparent or is it a lot of secrecy? Culture creation responsibility, is the player that creates the culture in the game? I will go in and explain all these. I'm just reading them through it now, so don't worry about it. Is it the player, is it the organizer? Character creation responsibility, is it the player that creates the characters or is it the organizer who creates the characters? Game mastering style, is it active or passive when you're game mastering, running a game? The game mechanics, is it very intrusive mechanics or is it very discrete mechanics? The scenography, is it a 360 degree illusion or is it symbolic, using a lot of symbolism? The loyalty to the world, is it playable, easy to play, or is it very plausible? Is it very much like a simulation of what should happen for real, or is it more done so that it should be easy to play? Because those might not match all the time. And then representation of theme. Is it more simulation and really realistic in that way, or is it more an abstraction of the theme that you're working with? So the first 6, 7. Communication style, verbal or physical. Is it mostly that we talk about things, or is it mostly that we enact it physically? The verbal part of this would be a game like Fat Man Down. I think it's called Fat Man Down, where the fattest person, this is a free-form game, a yeet-form game, they put the fattest person in the middle of the room on a chair, everyone else sits on chairs around and mob that person. Like bully him, bully that person for being the fattest person in the room. This also lead hunting is very close to home and so on, but that's very verbal. Gang rape works the same way. I think you sit down and you say what you do when you're portraying a gang rape. It's really harsh games, but except for that, it's very verbal. You don't do anything. You just speak. Whereas physical representation might be the game, like if you pull this lever all the way down, it might be a game like fluorescence, where you don't speak at all. You're in a room full of flour and you dance. And you're portraying a cancer patient's dying. Or you use methods where you would have balloons laying all over the place, but you have limitations. This is called white death, where you would walk around, and you can't. If you have feeling of rubber band between your arms, for instance, you will be like, I want to pick up that ball, and you pull it in, or like your hand is stuck to your forehead. So whatever you do, you have to borg, and you find characters from physicality like that, and then they start interacting around these balloons, and stuff happens. But that it's very physically engaged rather than verbally. That's still a LARP. It's just using your body as your communication means rather than. Some people will call it installation art, but since there's nobody watching, it's just for us. Pressure on the player. That would be. Is it very hardcore for a player? Is it very much onto the physically hardcore or emotionally hardcore for the player to play, or is it more a pretense that I have keep it at the distance for myself in the sense that I pretend to fight. We don't fight for real, or how much do we do when we bully? Do we bully with hardcore onto you're long thin dude, with that's when your ugly long hair, or is it more like you're such a snob because he's playing an upper class person? Is it like, well, what do I attack? Is it the player, or is it more of a pretense on the pressure? The bleed in is, we talked about bleed in, so you know what that means. Differentiation or close to home. Is it very far from me, or is it very close to me? Player motivation, is it competitive? Is it a challenge? We are trying to compete with each other to win the game. The two armies in Krigslive who attack each other, they are obviously fighting, so there's a competitive element there. Or is it more collaborative? We try to tell a story together. So even if our characters are fighting, we are collaborating because there's no rule point system where we're trying to win the game. Openness, transparency, everybody knows everything. Or secrecy, there is only what your character knows. You have an emergent story for yourself. You don't try to tell a story that everybody knows about. So none of these are these are different choices you make. There are no values in these. It depends what experience you want for your players, of course. Secrecy, transparency, culture creation responsibility. Who creates the general culture of the game? What the world, the people, how they interact, what kind of family structures are used, all that cultural content, if you want, that explains the diegetic world, the game world. Is it the player who is responsible to create the culture, or is it the organizers who is creating it so that the other players can? So we know how to interact. How do people say hi in this sci-fi world? And how do they marry and stuff like And the same goes for character creation responsibility. Is it the players that create, or is it the organizers that create the characters? And then you can of course be putting that lever way up or way down or somewhere in the middle. Any questions on that? Yes.
Are there any particular games or particular scenarios that really challenge what you think a particular setting is, or what a particular value is, like for culture creation responsibility? Like it seems like a scenario where it's mostly in the organizer's hands, but as the scenario progresses, you start to wonder whose hands it's really in. Something that sort of deconstructs these binaries as the game goes on.
These binaries are, as I said, a thing for you to, when you design, to think about. You choose 1 or 2 or 3 as your main ones, and the rest ones kind of happen. And you usually, that's why I say it's not a pedagogical tool for your players to understand what this game is about. You don't usually do that for this. Then you usually write a vision that is more understandable, and with your specs of demands on your players and on what you promise to do and stuff like that. So this is more for yourself to think about. So yes, there is games like that too, but generally speaking, we try to be as transparent with the not necessarily the story, but with the vision. What do we want to do? Because otherwise, if we play a fantasy game and everybody's in this fantasy game, and all of a sudden there is the stormtroopers that land, because really we were in a planet inside a Star Wars universe, or like Star Trek, and there's like people who breaks the first, what is it called? Whatever. But there's like all of a sudden people time traveling in there or something. It will jar the player, and sometimes we do that to create a jarring for the character, but a lot of time it just pulls the player out of the game, and they go like, "Fuck! I didn't sign up for this. Why are you having laser guns in my fantasy game?" And so you try to be kind of clear with the players what's gonna maybe not necessarily happen, but that it's what setting it is and what world it is. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Game master style. Is it a very active game master? Is the game master going into the game and changing things and leading stories, or is it very passive? Do you set off the game, give it to the players, and they do what they want with it? Is it more what we could call a sandbox, which is when you create the world? Those who play computer games or design computer games know these terms too, I think. It's where you create the world and a player can go and they can find things and they can do things and they can do whatever they want. Or is it more railroaded? Is it like a story that will happen? And then you'll have things in between that, of course, where you'll have okay, at noon there's going to be a big thing happening, but then there's 6 hours of nothing, and then we have the big party in the evening. So which is like not completely sandbox, but not railroaded all the way either. Game mastering style can also mean how much is that game master. We're going to go to game mechanics. How intrusive are they? How much do the game mechanics come in and say when, if they're very discreet, you won't see any. You won't notice that there is a game mechanic around it. A game mechanic could be that is very intrusive. On the other hand, could be a monologue. That could be a game mechanic. So we're playing our flow game here, and all of a sudden I knock my little glass to hold a speech, and everybody knows that the game mechanic is when I knock my glass to hold a speech, I'm going to hold a monologue of what my character thought about my boss, because that's what that means. But you as players can listen to my monologue. But you as characters, or your characters, they've heard me have some random speech that was unimportant. So you characters don't know what my character think of the boss, but you as players have heard that. And that's a very intrusive game mechanic, because it kind of cuts the game. Does you understand kind of where's a very discrete mechanic could be could be the simulation of when I hit Björn with a buffer sword, a sword that is soft, he will react as if his arm fell off, because he will play on the game mechanic that the buffer sword represents a real sword that will damage him, and he can take 3 hits and then he's died. That's a more discrete game mechanic, because it kind of is masked by the acting. Understand kind of what I'm saying? And of course there can be thousands of different game mechanics depending on what kind of story you want to tell. Scenography, 360-degree illusion, or is it more symbolic? If you're in a big room with just flour and you're dancing around in it, it's very symbolic, because it's actually representing more your inner life of the patient, the cancer patients. Whereas if it's a 360-degree illusion, you try to be as realistic as possible. So if you're set in this story, this Battlestar Galactica spaceship, then we take an old, which actually happened with the Celestra game, we take the Monitor Celestra, they take an old cruiser ship, and they rebuild it to be inside like an actual warship, and they rebuild it inside to look like a spaceship. And people are in there for 3 days playing like it's real, with computers that they can communicate with the ship, which is the game master bunker outside. So they can drive it and shoot and blah 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 and communicate with the world, which is a really like 360-degree illusion. Of course, you can, when you drive it down towards symbolism, it can also be very minimalist, if you want, rather than symbolist. So what we're going to do today, for instance, is going to be very minimalist, because we're going to be in a room with our own clothes. We're not going to change into things, but we're going to play a game that is still LARP or freeform. And loyalty to the world, how loyal is the game setting? Is it very plausible? Is it very loyal to how the game world works? Or is it very playable? Is it more pushed towards, okay, so if we're going to be really loyal to the world, everybody's going to sit silent and don't do anything for 3 hours right now, because the fascists are outside the house and looking for us, so we're all hiding. But we want to create more play, so some of us can't just help ourselves by like whispering or knocking something over, so we create play so that the fascists find us, because that's more funny than they're not finding us in a playable sense. So that's like, how loyal do we want us to be to the world? Now I took that out of a player perspective. It can also be from a designer, organizer, LARP writer perspective. How loyal do you want people to be to the setting or the theme? And that goes on to the representation of the theme. Is it very simulated, or is it very abstract? A simulation would be something that is as close to as it would be. For instance, if we simulate a war exercise, for instance, then we will try to make it as simulated as possible. So you as a soldier would experience what it would be to be a soldier in a real situation like this. And the other side is, of course, the abstraction, where the theme of the soldier is more abstracted. So we use a lot of light, and we use a lot of sounds, and we're in a more abstract setting maybe, and you will experience an artistic rendition of an abstraction of what it would be to be a soldier, because you experience all the sounds and the things, and it's very intense and it's maybe condensed. That's to explain the difference between a simulation and an abstraction. Now you see the last one here is your fader here. And your fader here is saying these are not all that is LARPing. These are some that we can explain some different sides of. you can use other faders to find what you think is more important for your particular game or for what you're doing in this particular research project or whatever you're doing. The game we're going to play when our destinies meet, I played that as when our sci-fi destinies meet. And what we did, we changed some other things too, but one of the things we did was saying, okay, we're going to be in a sci-fi world. That's decided, but we don't know what kind of sci-fi world. So we took three faders and we put them in. It was like, how much aliens are there? How high tech is it? Is it very like beam me up, Scotty, or is it more like Firefly, rusty spaceships kind of thing? Or is it, and then the third one was how organized is the world? Is it very highly organized, the space fleet kind of thing, or is it very much more like the Wild West in space kind of thing? So that way we could like set the settings so everybody had a sense of what we were trying to create. So you can use the faders in that way too. Of course, that was a way to create a world. That was the last here. The culture creation responsibility was us together doing that before the game, but using faders to do it. Very good. So it can be used as a pedagogic tool too if you want to.